Imagine for a second that you're sitting in a really dark theater. Yeah. Right? You're watching this complex play unfold on stage.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And you see a perfectly timed trapdoor open,
Oh.
or like a sudden shift in the spotlight. Or maybe a prop falls right exactly when the lead actor needs it to.
Right, right.
Now, if you've never been to a play before, you might just sit there and think, wow, those are some incredible, totally random accidents. But if you actually know how theater works, you aren't marveling at chance at all. You know there's a director up in the booth.
Yeah, somebody calling the cues, right?
Yeah.
Executing a very intentional script.
Exactly. And that completely shifts how you interpret every single moment on that stage.
It really does, because you stop looking at the objects themselves and you start looking for the intention behind them. You're basically trying to read the mind of the director.
Spot on. And that profound shift in perspective is exactly what we're exploring today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a big topic.
It is a massive topic. We are looking at a 250-year sweep of American history. But not through your standard lens of, economics or military strategy. We're looking at it through a deeply theological framework.
Right. We're unpacking a specific sermon today by Tim Lueking titled The Foundation, Building Upon the Rock.
Yeah, and this is actually just the first installment of a 4-part series he put together called Life and Liberty, A Journey of Faith and Freedom. It basically looks at the American story as this unfolding canvas of divine providence.
And he grounds this entire historical analysis in a very specific biblical text, Psalm 33, specifically verses 8 through 22.
Which is fascinating the way he ties that together.
Yeah, the core thesis here is that God has had a systematic plan at work in the history of the country. It's this argument that the United States didn't just, stumble into existence through a series of lucky political maneuvers,
Right.
but that it was actually set apart to accomplish a much broader divine purpose.
Now, I know for a fact that if you are listening to this right now, a giant red flag might be going up in your head.
Oh, for sure.
Because when we start talking about God ordaining the rise of a specific nation, it's so easy to immediately think of what we now call Christian nationalism. And we have to clearly define our terms here right at the start.
We really do. Because the author goes out of his way to make a crucial distinction between these two concepts. It's a vital boundary to set for this deep dive.
Exactly. I want to make it super clear to you listening that our goal here is just to objectively map out the author's arguments.
Yeah.
We aren't taking a political stance or endorsing anything. We're just reporting on the framework he builds.
Right. And to explain his framework, we have to look at Christian nationalism first. Generally speaking, that's the fusion of American civic life with a very specific cultural and religious identity.
It often treats God as like a divine mascot for the state.
Yeah, exactly, a mascot. It's this assumption that whatever the nation does, God is just automatically on its side, blessing all its political agendas. But the sermon explicitly rejects that idea.
It pushes back against the mascot idea entirely.
It does. Instead, it argues for the reality of providence. In this view, God is the sovereign author of history who uses nations, all nations, actually as a stage to display his faithfulness, his justice, and his broader redemptive plan.
So providence doesn't mean a nation can do whatever it wants and just claim divine backing.
No, not at all. It means the nation is deeply accountable to that director in the booth.
Okay, so let's look at how that director actually calls the cues, because the text highlights some incredible historical moments where it seems like nature itself just rewrote the script.
Oh, the weather anomalies. Yeah, these are wild.
So the sermon focuses on weather, specifically storms, as providential interventions. Take Christopher Columbus.
Right, 1492.
Yeah, he's sailing west, aiming for the mainland of North America. But this massive flock of birds and a sudden violent storm force his ships off course. It pushes him south toward the Bahamas and the Caribbean.
And from a geopolitical perspective, the author argues that that simple storm fundamentally altered the trajectory of the whole continent.
Because if he lands in North America...
Exactly. If Columbus lands on the North American coast, the future United States likely becomes a Spanish colony. It would have been subject to the Spanish crown and all its specific religious and political structures. A weather anomaly kept that from happening.
Wow. And the text points to a pattern of this, too. A century later, you have the Spanish Invincible Armada sailing out to crush Protestant forces.
The biggest fleet in the world at the time.
Yeah, and before they can even engage in a really decisive battle, catastrophic storms just shatter the fleet. Or, honestly, my personal favorite from the author's timeline, 1746.
Oh, the French fleet. The Duc d'Anville expedition.
Yes. The French dispatched this massive naval fleet to completely wipe out the Puritan settlements in New England. I mean, Boston is terrified.
They thought it was the end.
They really did. So the colonists declare a day of fasting and prayer, and out of nowhere, this brutal storm rises up and devastates the French ships. It completely neutralizes the threat.
And for the colonists living through that, you have to understand this wasn't just lucky meteorology. It was theology playing out in real time for them.
They were seeing the director's hand.
Exactly. Psalm 33 explicitly says, "He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap, and the purpose of the Lord stands forever."
Oh, I see the connection.
Yeah, when you are a vulnerable maritime settlement and the most powerful military force on earth is suddenly sunk by a hurricane right after you prayed for deliverance, you don't write that off as a coincidence. You view it as the active, restraining hand of Providence.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If you're a skeptic looking at this, isn't there a massive risk of confirmation bias? I mean, if the storm destroys the French, we say God saved us. If the storm destroys our own ships, we say God is testing us. How does the sermon reconcile that idea of providential victory with all the immense suffering that also happened?
That is the ultimate tension of interpreting history this way, and it's a very fair critique. The sermon's answer to that skepticism relies on looking at the long-term, systematic outcome rather than just zooming in on isolated events.
So it's about the big picture.
Right. The author isn't claiming every sunny day is a blessing and every storm is a judgment. The argument is that, despite human failure and all the chaos of the era, the overarching narrative arc resulted in a nation capable of offering unprecedented liberty.
And religious freedom.
Exactly. The colonists themselves interpreted these specific, narrowly averted disasters as divine confirmation that they were being preserved for a reason. They believed the stage was being intentionally protected so something specific could be built upon it.
Which brings us perfectly to what was actually being built. And according to the text, the very first thing constructed wasn't, a government building or a legal document.
No, it was a shared spiritual foundation.
Right. The author looks at Psalm 33, verses 8 through 12, which commands, "Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him."
And he connects that ancient command directly to the 1730s and 40s in the American colonies. This is the period historians call the First Great Awakening.
Just this massive, sweeping spiritual revival.
Led by figures like Jonathan Edwards and the English evangelist George Whitefield.
Whitefield is such a fascinating figure to me. The sermon notes he made 7 continental tours in the 1700s.
Right, traveling by horseback and carriage.
Across dirt roads. I mean, that is a brutal, exhausting schedule. But he basically became the very first colonial celebrity.
His impact really cannot be overstated, because before the Great Awakening, the 13 colonies were incredibly fractured.
They didn't really like each other, did they?
No, not at all. They had different currencies, different laws, different religious backgrounds. There were deep regional suspicions. They had almost nothing in common.
Wow.
But Whitefield's preaching provided the first truly shared cultural event. Up and down the eastern seaboard, people were suddenly experiencing the same spiritual awe. They were adopting the same theological vocabulary.
The sermon actually describes this phenomenon as a declaration of dependence on God, right? And that had to occur before a political declaration of independence was even possible.
Yes, and the statistics the author provides to back this up are just staggering.
Yeah, I'm right here. At the time of the nation's founding, nearly 98% of early Americans identified as Protestant Christians.
98%, that's almost total saturation.
And out of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 29 of them held degrees from Bible colleges or seminaries.
So when you understand that data, you realize this shared theology wasn't just some private belief system. It was the intellectual scaffolding of their political philosophy.
How so?
Well, because they shared a biblical worldview, they shared a fundamental belief about human nature. Specifically, they believed in original sin.
Okay, the idea that humans are inherently flawed.
Exactly, inherently flawed and prone to corruption. That specific theological belief is exactly what led them to create a government with strict checks and balances. I mean, you don't build a system designed to limit power unless you fundamentally believe that people cannot be trusted with absolute power.
That makes so much sense. So the theology directly informed the mechanics of the Constitution.
Right.
But I want to introduce a complication here. And it's one the sermon itself actually acknowledges Benjamin Franklin.
Ah, yes, Franklin.
Because by his own admission, Franklin was not an orthodox evangelical Christian. He was a deist. He was a man of the Enlightenment.
Very much so.
Yet the text points out that Franklin was mesmerized by this revival.
Yeah.
He would go out into the crowds in Philadelphia, and he would mathematically calculate that Whitefield was projecting his voice to like 30,000 people at once.
He was always the scientist.
Always. But here's my question. If Franklin didn't buy into the core theology of the Great Awakening, why is he so deeply invested in its success?
Because Franklin was the ultimate pragmatist. He was a brilliant observer of human behavior. So even if he didn't experience the spiritual conversion that Whitefield was preaching, Franklin recognized the immense social utility of what was happening.
The social utility. Okay, unpack that.
Well, he actually wrote in his autobiography about the incredible transformation of the manners of the people. He noted how suddenly you couldn't even walk through a neighborhood in Philadelphia without hearing psalms being sung in every home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Franklin saw that when a society is bound together by a shared moral framework, when they feel accountable to a higher divine authority, they become much easier to govern.
Because they govern themselves.
Exactly. He valued the foundation for its unifying, civilizing force, regardless of his personal theological distance from it.
That makes total sense. He recognized that this shared awe was basically the glue holding a really fragile society together.
It was.
But, unity and shared values only get you so far. Because eventually, that young nation had to confront a very dangerous blind spot, their own arrogance.
Yeah, that happens a lot after a big victory.
Right. Once you win a Revolutionary War, it is incredibly easy to start trusting in your own brilliance.
And that pivot from divine reliance to human arrogance is the focus of the next section of the text. It looks at verses 13 through 19 of Psalm 33. The psalmist takes a really sharp turn here. He issues a blunt warning against trusting in human power.
It's the war horse imagery, right?
Yeah. The text says, "The king is not saved by his great army," and it calls the war horse a false hope for salvation.
We really need to translate that metaphor for a modern audience because the weight of it can get totally lost in antiquity.
Definitely. A horse just doesn't sound that intimidating today.
Exactly. But to an ancient society, the war horse was the absolute pinnacle of military technology. It was the stealth bomber, the nuclear submarine, the cutting-edge drone of its day.
The ultimate weapon.
Right. So if we update that text for today, it's essentially saying your trillion-dollar defense budget is a false hope. Your booming stock market, your artificial intelligence, your advanced algorithms, they cannot actually save you.
That is a harsh reality check.
It is. To call the ultimate security apparatus of your civilization a false hope is a radically subversive statement.
It shatters the illusion of human control. And the sermon points out that the founding generation had to learn this lesson the hard way.
At the Constitutional Convention.
Right. By the summer of 1787, the glow of the Revolutionary War victory had completely worn off. The Articles of Confederation were failing miserably. The nation was bankrupt. States were threatening to go to war with each other over commerce.
Wait, literal war with each other?
Yes. The grand American experiment was quite literally unraveling at the seams.
And that sets the stage for the convention in Philadelphia.
Which is wild because we always picture this gathering as, like, a serene room full of demigods calmly writing a perfect document.
Oh, it was nothing like that.
Not at all. The reality was a sweltering, miserable room filled with bitter arguments, massive egos, and intense regional paranoia. After weeks of gridlock, they were on the verge of abandoning the whole project.
Their brilliant legal lines and political strategies, their intellectual war horses, so to speak, had entirely failed them. And in the midst of that absolute breakdown, Benjamin Franklin stands up. Again, Franklin. He is 81 years old at this point, the elder statesman of the room.
And what does he do?
He delivers this speech, reminding these delegates that during the war with Britain, they used to pray daily in that very room for divine protection. He literally asks them, "Have we now forgotten that powerful friend, or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance?"
Wow.
He tells them that if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without God's notice, it is mathematically improbable that an empire can rise without his aid.
It is such a stunning moment of intellectual humility. You have Franklin, the rationalist, the scientist, motioning for the convention to begin each morning in prayer. He recognized that human intellect had reached its absolute limit.
It had failed.
Totally. The gridlock only broke when they abandoned the illusion of their own self-sufficiency and submitted to the reality of Providence.
And that realization of human limitation didn't just happen on a national political stage. The sermon shows it happened in their personal lives, too. It brings up the last will and testament of Patrick Henry.
The give me liberty or give me death guy.
The exact guy.
Yeah.
The ultimate firebrand. A man who secured a massive political legacy. But when he is facing his own mortality, what does he write to his children?
It's pretty profound.
It is. He tells them that he has given them everything he can in his will, but the only thing that will make them truly rich is the religion of Christ. He basically says if they have that, they have everything. If they don't, all the wealth and political freedom he fought for will just leave them destitute.
Henry understood that political liberty, while incredibly valuable, is ultimately a temporary human construct. It's a warhorse.
Yeah.
You'll eventually fade, break, or be corrupted. True, lasting security had to be anchored in something eternal.
So when your war horses fail, when the brilliant political compromise falls apart, when the stock market crashes, it forces you into a position of profound vulnerability.
You realize you aren't the director of the play, after all.
Exactly. And that vulnerability leads us to the final verses of Psalm 33 that the sermon explores, verses 20 through 22. And these revolve around a concept that our modern culture absolutely despises.
Waiting.
Waiting.
Yeah, the verses state, our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield.
Let's be honest. In our current era of instant gratification, waiting is viewed as a glitch in the system.
No, absolutely.
If a web page takes more than 3 seconds to load, we are furious. If we can't get same-day delivery, we are frustrated. In our endless hustle culture, waiting is basically framed as a failure, or a lack of ambition, or a problem to be solved with, like a new life hack.
But this biblical concept of waiting is fundamentally different. The sermon explains that it is not passive resignation, is not throwing your hands up in defeat because you ran out of ideas.
So what is it?
Biblical waiting is a deliberate, active posture of the soul. It is the conscious choice to yield control, recognizing that God's timeline and wisdom are superior to human urgency. You are actively trusting the director to call the next cue, rather than rushing the stage to try and fix the script yourself.
And the sermon anchors this abstract theological concept in perhaps the darkest, most agonizing period of American history, the aftermath of the Civil War.
Such a brutal time.
We are talking about a nation that had quite literally torn itself in half. Over 600,000 dead. The economy is in ruins. The political system had completely failed to prevent the slaughter. Every single human institution had collapsed.
And in that atmosphere of profound devastation, the phrase, "In God we trust," was first placed on national currency.
Which is so interesting because it is incredibly easy today to view that phrase cynically, like it's just a piece of government branding or a political slogan.
Right, but the sermon traces its actual origin, and it is deeply moving.
It started with a letter from a minister, Reverend Mark R. Watkinson. He wrote to the Treasury Secretary in 1861, just as the trauma of the war was really setting in. And he basically said, if our republic shatters completely, future centuries will dig up our coins and think we were a heathen nation. We need to publicly recognize the Almighty.
So it wasn't born out of this triumphant Christian nationalism. It was born out of national mourning.
Yeah.
The sermon paints this really vivid picture of families burying their sons, of grieving churches, of a country raw and fractured. In God We Trust started as a desperate, quiet confession in homes where human strength had proven utterly useless. It was a declaration made in the dark.
The author even ties this into a brief reflection on Father's Day. He points out that fathers in that era, men who had seen the sheer horror of battle, who had watched their own war horses literally die on the field, they had to sit by lamplight and teach their children that real security wasn't found in a uniform.
Or a bank account.
Right. It was found in waiting on the Lord. That is the ultimate manifestation of this active trust. It's refusing to rely on man-made solutions when the man-made world is quite literally on fire.
So if we synthesize this entire analysis, the core message of Tim Lueking's sermon becomes remarkably clear.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Through the lens of Psalm 33, America's actual strength has never resided in its brilliant foundational documents, or its invincible military power, or its massive economic engines. Those are all war horses.
And no matter how advanced they are, war horses eventually get tired, they get old, they fail.
Precisely. The author's thesis is that the nation's true foundation was only solidified in the moments it remembered its absolute reliance on an active guiding providence.
The moments of humility.
Right. It's the spiritual awe of the Great Awakening uniting the colonies. It's the intellectual humility of Benjamin Franklin pleading for prayer when human politics failed. And it's the desperate, grief-stricken trust of families etching "In God We Trust" onto a 2-cent coin after the Civil War.
It is a sweeping, deeply challenging way to map out 250 years of history. And whether you fully share the theological premise of this sermon or not, The historical patterns it highlights really demand that we ask some hard questions about our own lives.
It forces us to evaluate the architecture of our own trust.
It really does. Which brings us to the end of our journey today. We have traced the hand of Providence from a storm off the coast of the Bahamas to the sweltering heat of Independence Hall. We want to thank you for joining us as we unpack the first part of this fascinating series, Life and Liberty.
It's been a great discussion.
But before we go, we want to leave you with one final lingering question to ponder long after this audio stops playing.
The big takeaway.
Yeah. If this historical framework is right, if true security is never actually found in the war horses of our advanced technologies, our bank accounts, or our political affiliations, then how does that change the way you evaluate your own stability today?
That's a tough one.
When the systems you rely on inevitably break down, when your personal script completely falls apart, what is the actual foundation you are standing on? Because maybe, just maybe, you aren't just sitting in a dark theater watching random chaos. Maybe the director is in the booth waiting for you to look up. Until next time, keep diving deep